So single subject, the reason it's a problem is that more than one subject can be confusing for voters. The elements can be contradictory, and multiple subject initiatives can be used to bundle policies that could not garner majority support on their own. And multiple subjects can also complicate fiscal analysis. We've got up here, Colorado's most famous example is the Tabor Amendment from 1992, and it bundled multiple subjects, including voter approval for tax increases, limiting revenue growth, requiring refunds to taxpayers, and defining ballot initiative language, and more. So the current state for council, all council ordinances, so that includes council referred ballot measures, is that they can have only one subject. We don't have that rule for initiated ordinances and charter measures. So citizen initiated they don't have that requirement. Next slide, please. The state constitution does have that rule. And as David Broadwell brought to our attention last time, the city of Colorado Springs does have a single subject ordinance. They did not put it in their charter. It was done through ordinance. Next slide. So the recommendation is that we would require that all citizen initiatives and referendums have only one single subject. And the recommended method of change would be a voter approved charter amendment. So that would be something that the Denver City Council would have to refer to the ballot for the voters to vote on. So does anyone have any questions or comments about this? And you can just raise your hand with the raise your hand feature, and we will call on you. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman. It's sometimes difficult for me to follow the single subject debates on the broader initiatives that have been on the state ballot. And when I've seen things criticized as violating single subject, sometimes I have a hard time seeing that. Then other times I've seen initiatives that appear to me to encompass more than one subject, but they're not called out as violating single subject. So I don't know if maybe Mark, you have a lot of experience in this. I see your hand up next, or David or Troy could address what is the definition of single subject enforcement? How is that, or review, how is that done? So I'd appreciate hearing more on that. Thanks.
Mark, would you like to respond to that since Councilman Flynn referred to you and you are the next person with your hand up?
I'm happy to, yes. Thank you, Councilman Flynn, for calling me out. The state standard is that there can't be two distinct purposes behind a ballot measure, or it will violate the single subject rule. And to the extent that that is a standard that is kind of hard to understand, it really is a case-by-case assessment. There's not an easy, honestly, there's not an easy way of looking at it other than to know that that's the test that the courts apply. But what it means really is that you can't have a ballot measure that tries to do two different things that could be done independently and have no real relationship to one another. You can have a single subject measure that does or attempts or proposes matters that could be addressed separately, but that doesn't mean that they have to be, just because the Supreme Court is pretty clear that what it won't do is use every kind of fine point of interpretation to try and keep things off the ballot. The right of initiative, after all, is a fundamental right under the Colorado Constitution. The reason I raised my hand, and I hope that answers your question, Councilman. The reason I raised my hand is that you should know that for instance, in the proposed language, which I'm just seeing for the first time. That is reflective of the constitutional language as well. But there has to be a process for a title setting agency whereby there can be review of an initiative to ensure that it meets the single subject test. That sentence left alone allows, as the state provision appears to allow, but it's never been used this way successfully, post-election litigation to try and knock pieces out of a ballot measure. And so I think you want to think about, if that's what you want, and it's a legitimate goal, you want to be very clear that there is a title setting process, there is a title setting board composed of people who have knowledge but not investment in particular measures, maybe paralleling the membership of the state title board, that there is a process for review of that decision by the title board itself and potentially judicial review. So I hate to kind of throw it on, and I'm not saying that this language is flawed, I'm just saying it implies a lot of subtopics that we probably need to think through and agree upon so that it is a workable process that we're asking initiative proponents to go through. Sorry for droning on.
Yeah, so thank you for saying that. And that is something we are going to discuss today is the ballot title setting process. So that's a little bit later in our discussion. And I know Councilwoman Sawyer and Ian Tafoya both had their hands up, but Clerk López, did you want to respond to that also?
No, I mean, that's what I wanted to provide clarity to. We'll address that later in the agenda on how we go do that. But I mean, it, you know, the one of the most important things about this is the reason why we have it in the charter and we propose it to as a method of change would be the charter amendment. It would line up with any title setting changes that we propose as well too. So.
Okay, and then next up is Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Councilwoman Black. Does Troy want to jump in? It looks like he may have wanted to respond to that topic, and I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction. So Troy, do you want to go ahead of me just to?
Thank you, Councilwoman. Yes, I'm going to clarify. You're exactly right, Mark. I put a draft ordinance together of this and have a couple of notes in there that depending on which way this group decides to go, title board or the clerk approving title, we definitely need some additional language in there about a title board and, you know, the ability for, if a title board were to reject a title for not single subject, the ability for proponents to come back and appeals processes. So yeah, this is kind of just getting the idea into the charter, and then yes, much more to flesh out later. So thank you for pointing that out. Thanks, Councilwoman.
Yeah, absolutely, Troy. Thanks for clarifying, because that was actually one of my questions was, is this just broad language that goes in the charter to create that right? And then we refine it in ordinance. So thanks for answering that for me. Councilman Flynn actually put in the chat a question. Mine is pretty similar to what he said. So, you know, his question for those who can't read it is for single subject, like group living is an example where it had a number of different components, but it was all sort of like under one umbrella topic of group living. So what's the effect, or what might the effect be? Is that a single subject? I know, so my question was very similar. I think, for example, when we wrote the remote meetings ordinance, we also did some minor cleanup, no changes, but just sort of like minor cleanup to some of the other parts in the ordinance. And of course, they were all redlined and everything like that. But wondering whether if we were to have, depending on how we write the ordinance, whether that would end up being an issue under a potential single subject rule. That's probably a question for Troy, or maybe, yeah.
Yeah, Troy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that. I know there's a lot of people on this call, Mark, David, who very well versed in this as well, Ben as well. But yes, your example is exactly right. You know, without having the actual language in front of me, right, you can do different things under a general, you know, group living, and then you can do different things that involve group living. That would be a single subject where you kind of, as Mark said, where you kind of get into different subject or more than one subject is when the two really aren't united or related at all, and to where a voter, if they were looking at the ballot title, would say there's two things here, like one I like, one I don't like. That's kind of where the distinction is made, and it gets muddy in places, especially with legislation. I know in the General Assembly there are single subject challenges to bills that are on the floor, and it's up to whoever's chairing the committee, whether it's the committee of the whole or the legislative committee, to determine whether it's single subject or not. So there are some gray areas, and a title board at the state level determines that, and appeals can be made directly to the Supreme Court. But yes, your examples are generally correct, that you can have a single subject with different underlying purposes underneath it, as long as they're all germane to that single subject.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. So then last question is on timeline, right? So based on our current policies and procedures and the timeline that we're looking at for adoption, is that something we would need to back up in order to say if we have a ballot title setting board, or if we decide to go with the clerk and recorder's office making that determination and there is a legal challenge? Like, what kind of time does that take? Is that, you know, how would we work that piece of it out?
So timeline is a big issue with all of this. I think we kind of discussed last time, and I think we have it as a separate subject for a later meeting, but I'll just answer you quickly that at the state level, the appeal to the Supreme Court is very quick, and they turn it back around. The state also has a set period for initiatives. So, you know, you have to hit your marks to get something on a ballot. We have a rolling period to where you can submit a proposed ordinance, initiated ordinance at any time. And then just as you kind of move through your process, you just end up on whatever election is the next one after you move through your process. So I think there are a lot of timeline questions we would have to address if we implement many of the recommendations. But yeah, it's a big messy one.
Okay, thank you. Really appreciate that feedback.
All right.
Looks like we have.
As Troy said, almost everything we're talking about has some relationship to the timeline. And so I think probably the next meeting, we'll talk about all of these things and how they align in the timeline. So we will talk about that more. And Ian's had his hand up for a while. So Ian, go ahead, and then we'll move to the next topic.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is, you know, I'm not an attorney, so I'm wondering about the word embraced and what kind in the second sentence here, embraced in the proposed and issued ordinance. I don't know what the legal standing around embraced is.
Troy, do you want to answer?
Sure. I just took this language from the Colorado Constitution, as Mark Bruce indicated, and we have similar language in the Denver Charter. So it just means if there is any subject in the proposed initiative that is not expressed in the title, then it would not take effect.
Okay. Then my second question, I think it bends into what Councilwoman Sawyer, which was saying, is, do we have any examples in Denver where we've seen more than one subject come forward, or are there previous ordinances that if this were to pass in the last even 5 or 10 years would have had voided pieces?
I mean, we had a little bit of a discussion about that in the last meeting when we brought this up as a topic, but I don't know if, you know, perhaps Mr. Gruskin or Troy or Councilman Flynn, you had your hand up about to answer that as well too. So why don't you go ahead? I can name a couple of them, but go for it,
Right.
Councilman.
Yeah, we all might have our opinions on, well, as you can see in the chat with Paige Burkholder commenting on group living and the multiple subjects that were encompassed under that umbrella title. But I think it'd be, we'd have to say that we would not get ordinance, at least at council, we would not get ordinances on the floor unless they were signed off on by the city attorney's office as being single subject. So I think Ian, maybe the nuance here is that even if something is declared single subject, it may not be the unanimous opinion of everybody in the room. That's why I'd like to see broader discussion. And the clerk wants to do it a little later in the meeting because it is on our agenda. But the thing that comes to mind for me was 2019, I believe it was, Proposition DD at the state level, which was ostensibly about funding water projects, but was really about allowing online gambling on sports games. And as a result now, I haven't seen many water projects, but I've seen numerous overflowing ads on TV for different sports books. And so the real intent of that one was to legalize online betting. And the sweetener was the water funding for state water projects. I would think if anything violated single subject, it would be that, but I was wrong.
And the intent here, I mean, folks, with looking at single subject is, one, the state uses single subject. There are various counties that have their version of it as well too. But I think, for us, we want to make sure that voters are educated. We want to make sure that the process is easy. And we're a voter-centric model. So we're doing everything possible to make sure that we do provide that. But also voters know what they're getting into, right? This is something that, when they look at their ballot, when they read these questions and these initiatives, what we try to do is make them as less confusing as possible. I know that's a little hard because sometimes you see those Tabor amendments that are printed in all caps, but at the end of the day, what we are able to control is just to make sure that it is a streamlined process, that it's something that is familiar to voters, whether you are voting on a Colorado question or a Denver County question. This is something that has become a best practice, and what we'd like to do is just make sure that we have that as a best practice here. So with that, I don't know,
So-
Councilman Black, want to move forward to the next one?
Does that mean that there aren't any examples here on the local level, or it's really just a matter of opinion is what I'm hearing?
I mean, Councilman Flynn actually said, pointed out that one of those, could have been the 2F, right? Or it could have been
DD.
another, there you go. Sorry, DD.
Right.
That's something that we could actually point to, and it happens on the state level. It can happen on the local level. It could be a matter of opinion, but I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure it's a streamlined process and not leave it up to chance.
Could I say, clerk, if you'd
Yes,
allow
go
me, just respond, Ian, I don't think I've seen any local initiatives that I would say violated it. I think what we're discussing here is maybe having a very rigorous process, a more rigorous process like that at the state level, like through a title setting board at the municipal level, mimicking what happens at the state. But I'd have to say, looking back on recent initiatives, I don't know that there are any of them that I would say, well, this is the reason we need single subject, right? So I don't think there's any finger pointing going on here. It's just that there should be a more rigorous process so that voters understand the way the title is written, right? Because initiators write the title right now.
Yep.
And so I think that's the issue we're trying to get at. Thanks.
Yeah, and I know, Mark, you have something important to say, but just to reiterate what Councilman Flynn just said, this is all about transparency and information for voters so that it is clear and concise. That is the only reason, and best practices is coming from the state. So go ahead, Mark.
I want to throw in here. The group needs to understand that even the Colorado Supreme Court in its early case law has acknowledged that an initiative can have a broad or general subject and purpose and still comply with the single subject requirement. We're interestingly, although kind of Councilwoman Black just referred to it, very little attention has been given to the qualifying phrase in the first sentence of Troy's draft, which must be clearly expressed in its title. This is about being able to encapsulate for voters in a very specific way what the question that they're looking at has to do with, and then ensuring that there really isn't, as Troy suggested, multiple conflicting Christmas tree kinds of issues that would put voters in a quandary about whether or not they're willing to trade off one priority for the other. So I think it is important to know that the clarity in that very first phrase of the ballot title is really what a single subject achieves for voters. But it's also an insurance policy because it keeps things that don't belong on the ballot because they put voters in an impossible position. So that happens too. As to the Denver ballots, I'm not as familiar with Denver as I am with the statewide process. I'll tell you that there was an early case in the 50s or 60s where there was a multi-subject ballot measure in Denver, and the court said there's nothing we can do about it because Denver doesn't have a single subject requirement. At that point, the state didn't have a single subject requirement. So it has happened in Denver, but the creation of a program, the imposition of a tax on someone who's participating in that program, and the designation of how the revenue is going to be spent are all part of a single package. So I know there is concern that this has to do with a particular measure. I have no idea what that background is, but I'm here to tell you that that the single subject requirement as applied by the Colorado Supreme Court acknowledges that there will be detailed, even sometimes general measures that comply with the single subject requirement. So this isn't, as applied currently under state law, some excuse to keep things off the ballot.
Thank you,
All right.
Mark. Okay, are we ready to go to the next slide, slide 7? Yep. Okay. The next slide is about initiative and ballot numbering. And we've had lots of people confused and complaining about, we have an initiative 300 every year. And what we've determined is that the clerk can just unilaterally decide to just number initiatives and referred measures consecutively, and not have to recycle them year after year. And so the clerk has agreed to start doing that moving forward. So this one was very simple. And so next year we won't start with 300. We'll start with a number. I'm not sure what that number is, but it will be more than 300, and they'll just be consecutive until we get to 399, and then we'll go back to the beginning. So does anyone have any questions or comments about that? Mark?
Just yay. Yay is my comment.
Okay. I'll make
Elegant
that note.
solutions are the best. Yes,
Yeah.
that's great.
All right, and Mark, your hand is still up. I suspect it's not from this. Okay. All right, so that one was easy. And then the next subject is the citizen referendum. And we talked about this a bit last time, and just about how awkward it was that a citizen referred repeal of a Denver ordinance was listed with council referred ordinances. And so we had a lot of discussion among this group, and I know I talked to some of our experts independently about what some good solutions are. And our state does it differently, and so do other cities. Sky pointed out to all of us that Denver is a different beast than the rest of the state, and that is true. Councilman Flynn wondered if we could change the vote to either a repeal, retain, and Troy did some investigation into that, and he can tell you more if you have questions, but it's really not a viable solution because of some state law. And so the easier and recommended solution that we came up with is that we would create a new label for citizen referendum. So on our ballot, it would be separate. And the clerk's office has suggested that we would number them differently, and that this change could be made through a council ordinance.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that we can pull from SOS rule into the code. The other thing is that, looking at it, we still want to make sure that that we have an ordinance there to pull the rule in. At the end of the day, it is something that we don't think needs to be more expansive. It's really, not worth the headache of going down that rabbit hole, except for, looking at what you see here in front of us as possible solutions and creating that new label for it, really introducing the citizen referendum. It was very rare, but it's also something that is in the charter. So we will spell that out and create a new process for that.
So any questions or comments about that? Karen, go ahead.
One of the things that I mentioned last time was that unlike Denver, where the ordinance goes into effect before the referendum process begins with the petition circulation, in other municipalities, as was previously stated, is that as long as a petition is filed prior to the effective date, and then it's determined to be sufficient, then the ordinance actually is suspended. What I'm asking is, are you still going to continue the procedure that you have now, where the ordinance goes into effect? And then what they're looking at doing is repealing, or are you going to hold the ordinance in abeyance and then ask the voters to decide if they want it approved or not? Unless I'm reading it incorrectly, I don't see any discussion of that here. So I was just curious to know what the plan was, if any.
Our plan is to keep the
Sorry, go
process.
ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I apologize. Council,
I was just gonna say our, after talking at the last meeting and then other conversations we've had with this group, our recommendation is that we keep the Denver process as is, but we just have it labeled differently on the ballot.
Okay.
But it's up for discussion if anyone wants to chime in, and go ahead, Clerk López.
Yeah, no, 100%, Karen. We really appreciate that. And Councilwoman, you're correct. I mean, what we don't want to have to go down that rabbit hole, create a whole new process, have to deal with that whole headache. So, it's really, we really don't have the need to make the change, except just to organize it differently, label it differently, and really call that out. And then, another discussion for, later on down the agenda is how we refer to these in the Blue Book as well too. So I think, keeping the same process is where we're at on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Councilwoman Black. I am a little bit concerned that keeping the same process here doesn't clarify the main issue for voters, which is that they don't understand, particularly as our ballots get longer and there are more issues on it. Fewer people have time to really pay attention and really, dig in. I think the Blue Book issue is a great one to help address that. And certainly numbering them differently makes a lot of sense, but I'm not sure that it solves the problem, which is some people are confused when they are voting yes, they're thinking they're supporting something, and what they're actually voting on is repealing it. So I don't know. I'm just not sure that this solution addresses, like in reality, for a voter who is particularly a municipal voter that is not necessarily paying much attention until, you know, they actually sit down to fill out their ballot, that's going to solve the main problem with this referendum process, which is the confusion.
I appreciate that, Councilwoman, with our charter requires a yes, no vote. So number one, on that particular issue, you know, because the citizen initiated referenda was such a nuance, it was so rare that, you know, we had huddled in our office and really, you know, between Troy, myself, our elections director, you know, to really look at what this meant, where this would be. We really didn't have that kind of ability to pull it aside. So, and we didn't want to do that without a public process. It's kind of why we're in this space right now, so that we can involve everybody in that. But, you know, creating that, what we decided and what we've looked at, what would actually work, was creating that new label for a citizen referendum, and also making sure that it has a different number, different kind of label, so to speak, but also it's separated out from council referendum, right? So it's not in the same group on the ballot either. So I think that's something that's really important for folks to realize. It is much more of a headache to go down that rabbit hole, and right now I think it's something that we can actually look at even further if we want to, but for right now, this is the solution to what, you know, I know that my office would be able to implement. Now, like I said, it would require a council ordinance and voter approved charter change. If we were to go to that yes or no, it would be inconsistent with state law. But at the end of the day, you know, it probably merits a whole new and different discussion. I mean, we could talk about it later as well too, as we go down the pipe.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think I'm just not sure that it really that solution addresses my concerns. My other fear when you're looking at the ballot with like the idea that council referred measures would be separated is that lots of times council members will vote to refer something to the ballot even if they don't support it. So like, I'm going to take pit bulls, for example, it was 2J in 2020. The change of pit bulls was not something I supported, but I do feel really strongly that it was a conversation that needed to be had by the people of the city and county of Denver. So I voted to refer it to the ballot so that the conversation could be had. I'm concerned that separating out the council referred measures, and that's sort of right, it's inside baseball. So I'm concerned that the separating out council referred measures like that in some way suggests to the community that that means that it is council supported. And those are two very different things. So I just want to flag that and maybe consider a different way of doing it, because I don't think that what we want to do is in any way, shape, or form signal to the voters that council members support something or not, because, you know, just because we believe that people should vote on something, I mean, we're going to vote yes on it, right?
Point well taken, Councilwoman, and I do understand that. At the end of the day, you know, we can only go so far as to what we can do to label on that charter. You know, what you saw, you know, from us is it is already separated. We do that two-way to Z, for example, because it's also in the SOS rule, right? So there's a lot of things that are, you know, that are state statute as well too, in terms of how we do that. So like I said, it's something that we are willing to continue to have a discussion on, continue to explore. It was so rare and so unique that, you know, this is the first time I've seen something like that, even since I was a councilman back in the day. So I think, you know, but point well taken. Jenna, it looks like you have a question. And Councilwoman, I think we want to probably fly through. I'm looking at the agenda and I'm looking at the time. I don't want to rush these kind of discussions because there's absolute value there, but I want to make sure that we're going through we are only on agenda item 2. And
Yeah.
we still have some items identified for discussions and recommendations as well. So I don't want to cut it short, so forgive me for pushing it along, but
Yeah, go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, no worries, Councilwoman. I'm sure my question or comment will come up at some other point in the agenda. We should move on. Thank you, though.
thank you.
Okay, the next item, Clerk López is going to discuss.
So circulator and committee training and compliance. We want to make sure, and folks who are watching this on the stream, at our last meeting of this committee, one of the things that we wanted to do, the problem is we see a lot of reports of circulators that are misleading the public to get them to sign petitions. There's a high volume of rejected signatures. At the end of the day, we want to be able to, we don't want to just come after and just with a punitive answer for it. We want to make sure that we're doing everything possible to educate folks, right? To do UC voter registration training that's required by state statute. We want to make sure that circulators and committees that have filed know exactly what to expect, know not to separate pages and everything else, know not to write Jose Cuervo and Mickey Mouse all over these petitions, right? So one of the current status that you see, there are laws that are governing circulation of petitions, including misrepresenting information or misleading voters, but the only remedy generally is to have the voter make a report and contact the district attorney. We want to make sure that we have trainings so that everybody starts from the same place, right? So they have the same set of expectations for paid circulators and compliance mechanisms. So what we've seen is that obviously the state has training and certification processes for entities that pay petition gatherers, but the city doesn't. So, know that every time a petition is filed, we have a shot clock in terms of to verify those signatures. It's not one petition at a time. We had 9 of them come through last year. That is staff, that's resources, we pull it in. And you know what? We love to see the democratic process at work, but we want to make sure that it's not that it's not too punitive. And the other thing too is that, this is not necessarily an easy lift for us, but we're willing to do it, and we can do it under our current staffing levels. But it's going to require some training and certification for entities that pay circulators, not just volunteers or candidates. It's, right now it's a complaint process, but we have to see what we can do with the state, and working with the DA's office for that process as well. It's not an easy fix, but it's something that we can do, right? And what we want to make sure is that we're starting from that same standard, that same place. If we want to promote civic participation, we got to make sure that everybody understands the rules and we're all operating from a level playing field. And so that's what the intent is here. So that's something that we can do. I don't know if there's any questions on that piece or anything else, but Councilwoman, I think we can, wrap that one up and go to the next agenda item.
That is ballot title setting, and you're taking that one.
Yes. So ballot title setting. Ballot titles are currently written solely by the proponents. We can only, advise. There's only so much that we can do. It's something that, is a little bit of an issue. There is no opportunity for an appeal or an edit of the ballot title. I, as the clerk in my office, can only approve or reject it. There was a lot of concern about some of the ballot titles in the past. This is not a new issue. We see it all the time. But where there's confusion as to what we can do about it, we really can't do much. So what we want to be able to do is consider a new ballot title setting process to ensure clear and concise language. So one of the first options is for the title board. It somewhat lines up with the state process. This is our current current charter change. It somewhat lines up with the state process and what they do, right? Know that they also have a different setup when they have their title board. They have a Office of Legislative and Legal Services. We don't, right? We don't have that mechanism like the state. So we're not necessarily comparing apples with apples. The SOS, the Secretary of State, the AG, the Director of Office of Legislative and Legal Services, or their designees, is something that they have. Like I said, we don't have that apparatus. And we strongly recommend against having a legislator be involved in the title setting decisions. If you look at the charter states that all election matters shall be vested exclusively and exercised by the clerk and recorder in our office. And that's built out of the independence that was built by the people of the city to make sure it is an independent board, it is an independent title and in process. And it would be quite a departure. So, further, one of the things that, we would like to consider is, the hearing process that can be, unwieldy and would require a substantial change to timelines. So what you see on that would be the first option. And that's what you're seeing right now on your screen. I'm having a hard time with my mouse here. So that option one would be to create that title board, to draft a clear neutral title in the form of a question, which would be ambiguously state the principle, the provision sought to be added by law, who would serve on the board. That's the first option, but like I said, it is a huge departure in terms of what we usually do. The second option, if you want to go to that second option, is to have staff draft process in consultation with the city attorney. And that would be consultation with the city attorney that would suffice with the charter and its provisions regarding our office and our duties. City attorney and council staff responsible for the title draft at review and comment stage of the process. Those of you who don't know this process from start to finish, it doesn't end up in front of the city attorney's office, assistant city attorney's office, and also council staff responsible for the title draft review. That's the review and comment period. So all these go in front of that process. The staff draft is delivered to the clerk, to our office, for review and edit in consultation with the city attorney. And the method for change for this would be the charter amendment. Now, if I can, kind of go on that second point where that draft that's submitted to the clerk and recorder's office and approved, edited, and rejected in consultation with the city attorney, this would leave room for any internal processes yet to be designed. And it resolves the membership problem for the option above. It creates efficiencies, by keeping the most current processes, but it also allows for more nonpartisan and impartial title for consideration. In the clerk and recorder's office, we do not get involved. We do not take sides. It is an independent office with elections. We don't take any sides. We don't have any dog in those fights. And that's to ensure that fair, transparent, and secure process, right? We would need an appeals process, likely for a hearing officer or district court. Part of the example from a similar sized city is Seattle, which almost has the exact same procedure. Options for a public hearing, they remain pretty unclear at this time, but it would require a charter amendment. And this is, my recommendation, given the office that I hold, given, the duties that we have in terms of running the elections in the city, having that remain independent. That would be my my best possible solution, is that second option. It is in line with charter already. And in terms of, I'll go ahead. I don't know, it looks like there's a question. Clerk O'Malley.
Ma'am, you're on mute. I was paying attention to the question in the chat with regards to capacity for the staff in the clerk and recorder's office to exercise option number 2. I think that's a good question. But also as to option number 1, I would just comment that if option number 1 is exercised, it has to be resourced appropriately, because that is no small task. And with the increase in the number of initiatives that we see on our ballot year after year after year, I mean, this could become a very, magnanimous type of exercise to go over all of these possible proposed ballot titles. And you have to resource that particular office in the correct way. And it has to be resourced in a way that takes into consideration, as was discussed earlier, deadlines and timelines, because we're not the only one involved in this process, because if something is ultimately appealed to a higher setting, you have to take into consideration getting the resolve of those issues in time enough to get these things on or off the ballot, or to opine whether they're going to go on there. So I just, I wanted to put that out there for consumption. It's not as easy as one would believe. I know that the goal is a good one, but you have to provide the appropriate type of resources if you're going to exercise either one of these options, internally or externally.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I know Jenna and Sky.
Thanks. I'll jump in real quickly. Certainly support this idea. And I think maybe building a little bit on what Stephanie was saying in terms of resources, I also would say with either option, and I certainly come at this with a little bit of a bias from the staff position I sit in, it would be important to make sure, and maybe it's an internal process as the clerk indicated, that we are involving the agencies to some degree. I think they are the practitioners that will have to put this in place. So if we're looking to set a title, I'd want to make sure we have good subject matter expertise helping to guide the decisions that are being made. I would also say, for option number 1, my only concern with that is if it is a high degree of elected officials that are serving on that, there's always the possibility that somebody will feel like it is being driven more politically than at the staff level. There are certainly things, pros and cons to both of those. And I don't mean to say that with any level of disparagement for elected officials who are wonderful, but I do think that has a tendency to put a little bit more of a political lens on it for people from the outside looking at who's doing the title setting. So just a couple of things to think about in terms of making sure we have good perspectives and good information at the table for making sure we're thoughtfully drafting titles.
And you're right, Sky. And I think, I really appreciate what you're saying there. And part of the reason, folks, is that it's an implicit bias, right? As a clerk, I don't vote on anything. I don't draft. I don't, I'm not in a committee besides this, right? This is actually the democratic process, but I don't vote on contracts or anything anymore. And so it's, as a legislator, if I were to step back in my past as a councilman, I'd be able to create a referenda, push that through council, get that on the ballot, and then potentially be on the title review board. So I think, it is a little bit of a dilemma there. It is a total departure from what we're used to in the charter. And let me just address the staff concern. My man, Ben Slayer, I call him Ben Slayer, Slayer. He has title board experience. So this is something that, with staff capacity, we have an excellent team. We have an excellent team that matches the excellent work. And if there is, our impact is to the budget. We now have over half a million voters in our university. 507 the last time I checked. It is a different Denver, and it is going to continue to be a different Denver. And in order to have excellent elections and continue this, we do have to resource stuff, but we do have the capacity to be able to do this currently. So, Jenna, and then Ben, I know I want to make sure that our subject matter experts that are on this meeting call can chime in as well too. and then I got Ian.
Sure. So one quick thing is that obviously I think, this is regardless of whether it's option 1 or option 2, and it's going to take a certain amount of staff time. So you either have to manage a committee and, get them prepped and have them run through it, or that staff is going to actually have to create something internally to do themselves. And so either way, I think obviously it's going to take staff time, but this does relate actually to what I was going to ask earlier, which was with to Councilwoman Sawyer's question about clarifying ballot language and about making sure that voters actually understand what they're voting on. I definitely think that having a ballot title setting board, something that's clear, something that relates to a single subject, is going to increase voter awareness of what they're actually voting on, which is great. But I wanted to throw out for this portion of the conversation, if this is also potentially a place where we can look at for clarifying summary language for the ballot as well, which then of course, obviously that adds a bunch of additional work onto whether that's a committee or whether that's internal staff. But I wanted to throw that out there as that question, because I think that that's something that we very, very much need is a clear idea of what it is. And I would definitely also echo the idea that option 1, I think whether it is politicized or not, is going to give the appearance of being much more political. And so I would definitely prefer moving forward on something closer to an option 2, but I think that it would be very important to add that language around subject matter expertise, because I think sometimes I've personally experienced going through the state title board more than once, where you have very politically motivated language, say being used around medical ballot measures, things that relate to people's access to medical care. And we don't actually have doctors who are part of that setting. And so I think that having that as a requirement would be really foundational for any changes that we have. So.
I appreciate that, Jenna. Thank you. Ian, if you don't mind, my man, I'm going to call on Ben because he is our subject matter expert in the office, and this would definitely fall on his work plan.
And I'll be quick because I think Clerk López addressed a couple of the things that I was going to talk about. Just wanted to say thank you to Clerk O'Malley for the shout out to the staff time, because I think that is a very important thing. But I just wanted to remind folks that under the current process, what's static today, the clerk's office in consultation with the city attorney's office is basically doing this, but without the ability to, so we review and reject, but we don't have the ability to actually modify the text. And I think that under this option 2, we both have that new ability to do that, but we've also created a division of labor by placing that initial staff draft in the hands of the city attorney's office and city council staff. So that in getting back to the idea of subject matter experts, having a staff draft come to you that's been drafted by folks that understand the state jurisprudence on title setting and are able to look at that with regard to single subject and those types of things, that makes the job of the folks in my office much easier when you get a draft that you can generally feel confident meets those qualifications, and then you're there to essentially tweak it as opposed to create something out of whole cloth, or as the current process is, as I've learned from Troy and from my predecessor in my job, rejecting a title with a kind note to say, here are some things that we think would help, but potentially going 6 or 7 rounds before those things get actually adopted. And so I think that under this new option, we would probably be in a little bit better position than we are now. And we'd certainly be adding to that subject matter expert component and making sure that it's being properly drafted at the outset. And also with the option for appeal, I think that we all agree that the ability for proponents or others within Denver who want to disagree with the title that the clerk's office has come up with, that there should be an avenue for that. Thanks, clerk.
Oh, thank you. And just to clarify, I mean, in the process right now, we must put in writing why we're rejecting, and we do allow folks to cure sometimes as well too. I mean, not sometimes, but as much as possible. We already did the work, and we just can't make the edit, right? So I think that's something, and our office, especially this year with all those initiatives, really we had a lot of weight and pressure on us to be able to do it, and it was hard. We had to tell people we don't have the authority or the power to edit. we can't do that. It is written by the proponent. We can only reject. And if we do that, it has to be in writing. So that's that part. Mr. Tafoya, why don't you go ahead, and then Clerk O'Malley, I see your hand up. Is your hand still up from the last discussion or for this one? I'm sorry, I don't want to dismiss the hand. Go ahead, Ian.
I appreciate that. First of all, from my perspective of working on these, I think this is a good idea. I think that the amount of time it's taken to go back and forth, rejected, yes, minor changes with words. And it's challenging, especially when you're coming from our perspective of grassroots campaigning, of trying to do all the other important components that are to bringing the credibility to the work you're doing. I think the longest maybe it's taken before is like 5 weeks. And so I wouldn't want to see it be longer than it already is. I do share the same concerns that if there's a lot of work and not enough staff time, then you're starting to lose access to democracy because of just the timing and of the cycles. I do appreciate the appeals process. I'm curious, if someone appealed, would you still be allowed with the previous one to go out and start collecting, or could appeal be used as a way to slow the process, to slow the cycle that you're in? And I think that would just be a concerning thing, because it's already hard enough to get the title and then get the books printed and get them out there. And so that's just a process that calls my mind. But I do see this just as a general addition to just democracy and civics, because we need help doing this and we get better. And as people come back and get that time with staff, I think it improves just generally the people who are working on the work.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Terry and Ian. And you know what? That's something that we definitely can address in as we start formulating these processes and creating the processes for it. And we are discussing those what that appeals look like internally, but it's a good flag for us next time. So thank you for bringing that up. Committee members, do we have any other questions on this particular or comments on this particular option? Mr. Gruskin.
Thanks. Just a couple points. I'm probably a dissenting voice, not that I think that a title board necessarily at the local level is the perfect solution. But to the extent that this is a citizen process, the openness of how you get to the ultimate question that's presented is key, and delegating it to staff with internal staff review is anything but transparent. So I'd suggest that to the extent that this option 2 is a serious one on the table, there needs to be a presentation either by the staff that come up with the draft or by the clerk that reviews and edits it. Because I'll tell you, in my practice, the title board is extraordinarily well intentioned and extraordinarily knowledgeable. And like any other group of 3 people, it can make a mistake. And it has made a mistake in summarizing an initiative or in assessing the single subject process. And if you're going to have this be an internal staff process, there really needs to be some sort of presentation of the title to the proponents in a public setting, so that if there are errors, it can be corrected, and also so that there's some sort of record that a court or reviewing body could look at. So if this is kind of and I don't know that this is necessarily the will of the group, it seems to me to be an incomplete process to have city staff come up with a draft, city staff review and edit it, and then simply presenting the resulting product to the proponents. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate that, Mr. Gruskin. I think those are some great points. All options are on the table in terms of that process. We're doing that internal review, and we have actually been considering it that at that public point of doing it during the reviewing comment stage of the process. However, this is something that we've been really putting a lot of our resources and thinking energy on. So I wanted to I don't know, Audrey or Ben, if you wanted to chime in, Troy as well too, but I also don't want to ignore Mr. Broadwell's hand that's up as well. So, and Mr. Broadwell.
This is responding to the comments that Mark Gruskin just made. And I alluded to this at the last meeting, but I'll just say it again. The municipalities all throughout Colorado receive initiative petitions all the time. And the norm throughout Colorado is for the title setting to be done by the clerk or the governing body in consultation with the city attorney. So it's not the elaborate hearing process that you see at the state level. And this is just the normal way that all other municipalities do it. And I've never frankly heard many complaints about that, but it is more of an administrative and staff-driven function that is performed by appointed clerks, for example, and Karen may want to comment on this as well, and in other municipalities. Rarely does it get to be litigated, does it go up on appeal? It does kind of happen inside that box at a more administrative level. And I'm not aware of any other home rule municipalities that have gone the lengths of actually having a board that emulates what the state does with the state title setting board. So I wanted to provide that context again.
Thank you. That's solid. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I just
Mr.
will, Karen made that same point in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, Councilwoman. Mr. Tafoya, you have your hand up again.
Well, I was just gonna say, it doesn't really feel like it's a public facing thing now either, right? It's just one person or a group of people going back and forth with a staffer as it is.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And those are great comments. Know that this is a work in progress. Know that, we have a process internally that analyzes that would create that process, that would involve, a lot of the folks here at this table to be able to chime in on as well. But that is the direction that, I mean, as the clerk, knowing what my role is under the charter, it does make sense. It was just very hard for me and my staff to have to tell people, sorry, we don't have the power to do that. Not like the other ones. So I think having that would be really, really helpful for the democratic process as well. So, but it would require charter change. So, all right. Councilwoman Black, I don't know if we have any other questions on that particular one, but I think it's important that we move on to the next one.
Okay, and before we do, I just wanted to remind everyone from the public and who's in the chat, we did add 15 minutes of public comment to these meetings, and we are not going to be responding in the chat to questions. We agreed that it was pretty distracting for the committee. So if you do put questions in the chat, someone from the clerk's office will email you answers after the meeting. And you can also email to bamc@denvergov.org and someone will respond to you. So just remember, we do have public comment the last 15 minutes. So we saved the best for last, and it's the ballot information booklet. And I have talked to most of you and have learned how complicated this is. I have learned that Denver is the only city in our state that has a ballot information booklet, unless it is a Tabor question. And there are all kinds of challenges with it, but at the same time, everyone is in agreement that we need to have better information in our ballot booklet. So I don't think we're going to come to a decision today, but we're going to talk through some of the issues and present some of ideas around them. So I think we can just skip forward to some of the slides. The state has a great way that they create their ballot booklet, but they have a team of employees who create the analysis, and they take feedback, and they create objective analysis that goes in the ballot booklet, and they have the time and the ability to do that, and we don't have such a thing in Denver. And our Department of Finance is responsible for doing the fiscal impact statement, but it's all in a very, very condensed timeline. And that is one of the problems, because the clerk's office is not able to get the printing and mailing done at the time that they're required to. So we've talked about some of the possible fixes to this. And I know we had a few slides on this and we skipped over them because I think most of you are familiar with what was in them. I went over some of these possible solutions. And I think we can talk about it some more. I'll just throw out one idea that I had. For non-Tabor questions, could we change the deadlines? Could we require an analysis earlier that would help the clerk's office start a draft layout of the ballot booklet in advance? I also wondered if there could be a word limit on what people submit, and I will just throw those out and let you all raise your hands and see what your ideas are. Councilman Flynn?
I think, well, just to kick it off, I think obviously there needs to be more time if we're going to incorporate some of these requirements for the ballot information booklet. It's a very useful tool. And the fact that no other municipality does it, I don't think is something that we should look to as a goal to aspire to. If there's anything that's driving this body right now, it's the number of concerns we had from voters about how difficult it's been to interpret, to decide how to vote, to understand what they're voting on. So the initiation of this ballot information booklet a few cycles ago has been great. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but Clerk Lopez's office needs to have a longer window of time in order to prepare. Now, does that require moving back deadlines for submitting initiatives or referenda on the part of council and citizen initiatives? If so, let's talk about that. But I think it's most crucial to get good quality information into the hands of voters.
I appreciate that. And if I could chime in on that, Councilman, that would actually help us is to close that public comment period at 60 days. And that would allow a better timeline for the summaries and printing, obviously. But the other thing that we have to keep in mind, because we are a Section 203 under the Voter Rights Act compliant city, the Spanish translation. And if we move on forward in time, I mean, we didn't hit that threshold in this last census, but we are very close to having that third language in Vietnamese. We need that time, and we need the time for us to be able to do this effectively, fairly, that the translation is accurate, because it's not, my Spanish is very much barrio at the most, right? And I think, there's some words in there that, I would have to go back and scratch my head on and ask some A+ Spanish student, AP Spanish student folks for. But at the end of the day, it is that timeline is critical for us. Remember, in elections, like, we have to make sure it's all the materials that they're approved. They've went through all these processes. They're in line with state statute. They're in line with what's required by us by law. It's a finite time for us to have those designed, edited, sent to the printer, and then coming back to you all, or all of us, right? We don't third party ourselves as government, so that you have them in time to be able to vote, right? And we have to do that. Like, I cannot express enough just how meticulous we are with the editing. We do not want errors on the ballot or in the booklet. So we have to really go through those with a fine-tooth comb, and it is a heck of a process. So I appreciate that, Councilman. That's exactly what we would like to see happen with the booklet. Any other questions on the Blue Book model, public comment, anything like that on that? Oh, and I'm saying public comment right now, but the review of public comment process on this. Councilman Black, you have your hand
I just
up.
raised my hand because nobody else did, but you know, in a perfect world, I would like to see our blue book be more like the state blue book
Yeah.
and have a real analysis by experts that is objective and doesn't have any editorializing in it. And I know there's a lot of reasons why we can't do that, but I'd like to hear other people's suggestions of ways we can move closer to that model. And I see that Councilwoman Sawyer has her hand up, so I'll put my hand down.
Thanks, Councilwoman Black. I actually was just going to say that I agree with you completely. I think, you know, the purpose of this working group is to find ways to ensure that as a city, we are putting out information to our voters that is that clarifies things, doesn't confuse them, that is fair and balanced, that is, you know, helpful to them. And I, you know, certainly know, having written for information for the Blue Book before, it is very easy to not remain neutral in writing something like that. And so, you know, when we've got staffing challenges, when we've got timeline challenges, when we've got challenges that come with the no requirement of a fiscal impact study of any kind, those kinds of things, it doesn't achieve the goal we're trying to achieve, which is to really make voting clear and simple for our voters. So I can't support you enough in your comments that we need to get closer to, if not, you know, mirror what the state is doing with the Blue Book, because I think it's really, really important to ensure that our voters aren't misled.
Thank you, Councilwoman and Councilman, council members. There's a couple of things here, and I want to really focus in on this part. So one, you know, we are a nonpartisan office. We don't have a dog in the fight. We don't do, you know, it's not our business how you affiliate, how you vote. It is that you vote. That's all we care about, right? And that it's easy for you to be able to have access to that democracy, right? So one of the things that we want to, that I want to kind of put out there as well, just to kind of clarify some of that. I would love to have what the state has. But remember, I talked about that Office of Legislative and Legal Services, a whole department of folks that just, that's all they do, right? And it's extensive, it's mostly nonpartisan, and it goes through a bipartisan legislative process. And I want to be clear about that too. For us, I know we say nonpartisan, everybody understands what the word nonpartisan means, but we are bipartisan. That's the beauty of what we do, because we have Republicans, independents, unaffiliateds, Green Party folks, Democrats, all working together. And that's what builds the trust in what we do. And that's why the model is a national model, right? And that's why it's secure. We want to be able to do that with everything that we do, including this booklet. And I think, you know, with this booklet, you know, we have no similar mechanism for timeline allowances. I mean, to align with this model, we would need a massive investment in policy staff. Now, the other thing that can take place, I want to really look at the bullet point part 2 right here, which says moving up timelines for Tabor notices for city council via ordinance. Right now, it's currently set at 43 days. Oh, if we can address that, that would help us tremendously. So council, love for that to take place so that we can actually do that. Now, back to that notion of you know, having, you know, a public comment process for the municipal information book with this Blue Book. You know, while I, as the council, my staff, that we can summarize opposing comments, we are not in a position to editorialize or to dictate, especially the veracity of the statements, right? So know that, you know, it can be very limited, and that's something that we can really dive into. It is important. The Blue Book is important, and we can, you know, look at cleaning that up. What I don't, and what I agree, what was absolutely embarrassing was seeing it on the news and being characterized as Facebook on paper, because frankly, I would have to agree. The way that it was, the way that it is, and the way that, you know, discourse has become a little bit more hot over the years, it has become that. So we would like tools to be able to clean that up and have a blue book that we can be proud of. I'm sorry, Mr. Gruskin. Councilwoman, I think you have your hand up as well too.
Just a little bit of perspective on the statewide process. Number one, they literally start more than 150 days before the election to take in information from interested parties in order to come up with their blue book analysis. And so it is not necessarily subject matter experts so much as it is, you know, both legislative council folks and Office of Legislative Legal Services folks who are used to assimilating information for drafting and analyzing legislation. The second point I want to raise is if you really are aiming at a blue book kind of document, the courts oftentimes, when language in a voter approved ballot measure is ambiguous, look to the blue book as indicative of voter intent. And therefore, the issue of clarity and balance is all important. And so if you're going to do this job of coming up with a blue book, which I believe is a laudable goal, it is critical that it be done with enough time, with enough staff, with enough focus, and with enough attention, notwithstanding the other duties of the people that are doing it, to really engage in the substance. And oftentimes, at least at the statewide level, that means starting to write blue book analyses for ballot measures that may not actually end up on the ballot. And that's because the focus is on acquiring and aggregating information rather than waiting until you actually know what's on the ballot. And I applaud the city for wanting to come up with a blue book, and I certainly wouldn't speak against it. But I think it may be useful in anticipation of another meeting to take a look at what it is in the blue book that is useful, because there are different elements in the blue book. There is, and a recent development is that the staff comes up with, this is what a yes vote means, this is what a no vote means, this is what it will do. And it is, you know, a couple of paragraphs on those two sides. There's also a summary of key points in the measure, history of the law, how this would operate, arguments for and arguments against. I'm not suggesting that there is any element that you would want to dispense with, but if issues of resources and staff are a question, then what you may want to do is think hard about assessing what it is that will really help Denver voters in assessing the kinds of measures that come up for them. Thanks very much.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I think that's the quintessential question of the blue book, right? What's the purpose? We want an educated, we want voters to have access to something that is other than what they're being pushed on their phones through ads or in their mailbox, right? So neutral. Mr. Broadwell or Councilwoman Sawyer, you had your hand up, and Mr. Broadwell.
That's okay. Mr. Broadwell can go first. I'll jump in since I just said something.
I always defer to council people. I see both Sawyer and Flynn, so I've never jumped in front of two council people.
Yeah, sorry, Councilman Flynn.
Feel free, you know, David. You don't work for us anymore. Actually, go ahead.
Since I have the floor, and I'm going to agree with Gruskin this time, so that's the good news. Everything he said, I second, and let me take it a step further. In terms of what I, as a voter, find valuable in the state blue book is the summary of the major pro and con arguments. That's the kind of thing I think a typical person, well, what do the people for it say? What do the people against it say? And a crucial difference for what they do that Denver doesn't do is that it's a summary and distillation of broad conceptual arguments for and arguments against. It's not a publication of every comment that comes through the door verbatim. It's a distillation, putting it into plain English and being fair about it in terms of the major arguments for, the major arguments against, and doing it in a really pithy and useful way. And so I'm jumping ahead to the point that Mark made about one guy's opinion of what would be more useful in a ballot information booklet would be a system like that. But then another overall point I want to make, and this is a huge thing that was on the slide, is the resources, the expertise, who's actually going to do it. And I'll just point out, the Colorado Secretary of State has nothing to do with drafting the Blue Book at that level. It's done, as we all know, by Legislative Council in consultation with a big public process and so on and so forth. But in Denver's system, I think it would inevitably be some combination of the legislative and executive branch that would prepare anything more in the way of an analysis, including that kind of summary of pro-con statements. I don't necessarily think this would be the clerk's function. Others who may have been involved in the 2018 discussion may be able to explain this to me, but we backed into the clerk having this role of summarizing pro and con comments because that's the way it was for Tabor. The Constitution requires pro and con comments to be submitted in 500-word summaries to be provided by the chief election official. But there are all kinds of other initiatives and referenda that don't have to do with the Tabor requirements, that Denver can craft whatever process it wants in terms of who it designates to perform these summarization functions. And so there's a lot of process questions embedded in what I just said. But back to my other point, giving people a key understanding in summary form of the arguments pro and con from an objective source is what I hope we would strive for.
Well, I think I made a mistake in letting David go first because I had an opportunity to say almost exactly what he said, and I could have appeared smarter than David Broadwell for a change. So, Clerk López and Councilwoman, I was going to suggest that just as with the state, the Legislative Council sort of leads that process, not sort of, they do. And the City Council of Denver is the legislative branch. And this might be something that should reside on the central staff, which of course is not equipped right now to do that. But I think properly speaking, that's where it should reside. I see that Ann Murdaugh in the chat noted she agreed with David that the pro and con section in the Blue Book is hugely helpful to people as they analyze what they're reading in the actual text of the initiative they are voting on. So I would like us to explore having the legislative analyst staff at the City Council undertake this, and if it takes if it means that there needs to be a budget expansion, then so be it. Thank you.
So I'll just jump in. I think that both of Mr. Broadwell and Councilman Flynn have said, have really hit the nail on the head. I think what's valuable about the Blue Book and is this sort of clarity that it gives people, you know, in the summaries of the arguments. So I think in terms of process, we have several options moving forward, but if we decide we're going to pursue an option where we have a ballot title setting board, perhaps it is City Council, central staff, and City Attorney's Office, and that ballot title setting board that looks over the Blue Book comments and works on the summary, and then you know, works with the clerk's office on that, or maybe it is at that's where the public comment period or public facing discussion comes in. I don't know. I mean, I think that's, you know, something we need to consider moving forward, but I do see the value in the summary piece instead of sort of every comment that has ever come in. I know what my email inbox looks like. And so I think, you know, that we've got to make a change here that makes sense for the voters and adds value. Whatever that looks like on the internal side is we can figure that out.
Thank you for the comments, Councilwoman. Mr. Broadwell, before I say anything, because I know better, go before David Broadwell. Oh, he didn't have his hand up. Oh, okay. So I appreciate that. And thank you. I really appreciate the comments and having folks chime in. I'm gonna burst the bubble here and be very unpopular, but timeline implications. Remember that whatever we decide, and like we discussed with the title board, and this would be a little different, right? In terms of those where they're at in the process and what they do. For us, timeline implications are huge, right? And those deadlines are finite and have huge impact. So I do want to make sure that that's still in people's minds as we and give that frame of context as we're having these conversations as well too. So I do see it's 4:07. Councilwoman, I don't know if there's any other. I don't know. I want to look at. I'm looking at two names here: Ben Schleier and Audrey Klein, who both work on policy and compliance in different areas of almost the same areas of our office. I want to have a chance, and then also Ms. Dawson, my elections director, to be able to chime in on any of that if you want to. I know I'm calling you out here. It's okay if you're eating Lucky Charms. I'll probably do the same thing too.
I actually was doing some math just while we were talking through, because we also value the pro and con statements and want the booklet to be valuable. But just to put some context out there, and as we're thinking it through, every change has this, chain reaction type of event. So currently it's 120 days is the deadline to file a petition with our office to appear on the next citywide election. And then you subtract out the 25 days that's currently allotted for us to complete verification. And we're going to talk about that timeline because, as the clerk mentioned, we had 9 petitions that were kind of scheduled to be filed around that same time, which we had 25 days to do potentially all 9 of those. Luckily, fate worked in our favor, and some folks filed early and things of that nature, but still, so 120 days minus the 25 days puts us at 95 days. So I believe it was mentioned previously that the state's process is starting at 150 days before the election day. So we're already just putting some context out there that for us to continue to think through. Thank you, Clerk, for that opportunity.
No, thank you, Madam Director.
And Mr.
Audrey,
Clerk,
Ben?
Mr. Clerk, this is Audrey Klein. Sorry, I'm still on my camera. I'm the one screencasting here. I do want to obviously thank everyone for their opinions here. This is excellent things to chew on, and that we'll sort of take to the timeline. We'll take to the charter and the statute and the code and come back with some thoughts. I'm particularly interested in some of the group's opinions on whether or not we should allow, I'm trying to frame my words here. Currently, only proponents can speak to a pro in the pro-con statements. And the clerk's office does not have the ability to summarize those or editorialize or anything to them. That could be changed. And I want to take the temperature of this group to see if there is more comment that could be brought in there and then summarized. Because they are correct that the clerk's office does have the ability to summarize con statements. And so just want to put a little context out there and see if that's where folks are leaning or not.
I know there's a couple of hands up. Co-chair Kendra Black, and then I know Troy, you may want to chime in.
Yes, I do think that we should summarize both the pro and the con for non-Tabor questions. Was that your question, Audrey?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. I think that will that can be done, I believe, in ordinance. I really don't want to talk too much because Troy's sitting here. I can see him, and I don't want to get it wrong. He's the expert, but I do believe that is something that we could change, and so we can take that into consideration and bring back some recommendations for it.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's all I wanted to chime in and say is, and also add on to Audrey's point that it's the same for council referred measures. Right now, only council is allowed to put forth a pro statement, and any resident can do a con statement. So I think, I mean, this is a policy question, not a legal question, but I think if we open that up and then do the summaries, we'd steer away from some of the problematic statements, not true statements that have appeared in the ballot book, but still protect the First Amendment right of citizens to be able to submit those comments. So I think opening both of those up, and then I know that the timeline discussion is next week, but I just want to reiterate again, the state has a set period for their initiative. You have a deadline to submit it. You have a deadline to get to review and comment, deadline to get through title board, instead of this rolling process we have. So to the extent we look at adding any of these processes to the blue book, I think it's hard to talk about without also talking about a set period like that. Otherwise, you're going to be adding, several additional year-round staff that will just be dealing with these. So thanks.
Appreciate that. Group, I want to make sure that we're minding the time here. Do we want to go on to the next agenda item? And we will absolutely follow up. We will do everything possible to make sure that you have access to some of the things that we're working on, some language. We'd love to tap you in, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's something that you panel that you didn't ask or thought about after the fact. We'd love to be able to continue to consider it. Same thing with the public. Folks who are watching, please hit us up. I mean, we usually have this time to kind of go through the sausage making and do that, obviously in the sunlight, and have this conversation, because this does impact the democratic process in Denver. We want to make it streamlined. We want to make it transparent, functional, where it makes sense, and it is something worthy of our office and our city. I do want to make sure that you have an opportunity to chime in. We do have a public comment period after this, but please also know that you can also write to us. You can also, and I'm not saying to write to us and we'll send you a sticker or something. Write to us, and we will take that in, and we can respond in a way that's timely. But you do get a sticker if you turn in your ballot. If you vote, you get a sticker. So go ahead. I'm sorry. Councilwoman Black, it looks like what we have in the chat. And do we have anybody signed up for public comment to speak? Amelia has posted, seeing what we have in the chat and Q&A here. There's one written comment from Linda via email, quote unquote, if you think that anybody wants anything but reverting to paper ballots that are hand counted by smaller precincts, you're delusional or completely voter fraud. I think we got that one. Thank you. Somebody said Councilman Flynn hit the single subject on the head, one subject at a time, period. Councilman, is that from your wife or something? Just kidding. And then so just how do you make public comment now? I think if you want to submit something, you could just, how do we work that right now? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out. There's some in the Q&A. There's also some in the chat.
Clerk, I think the meeting host can promote Owen.
Yeah.
Over as a panelist to make a verbal public comment. Is that
absolutely
okay?
Yes.
And just so everyone knows, we do have a sign up for public comment. And I know you just asked that Owen be put in public comment, and that's fine. But in the future, we'd like people to sign up for it in advance.
Mr. Owen. Owen Perkins.
Am I here? Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Yes,
Oh,
we
okay.
can.
Well, I didn't realize there was public comment, so I just had a couple things that came up along the way that I thought I'd respond to. And I do want to note that as somebody who's brought initiatives to the ballot and worked in the process, I do have personal experience with non-neutral language coming from the city, specifically in terms of the ballot booklet language. But I think, the point that people have made that you don't have the legislative services department that serves that kind of neutral purpose that we see at the state level. It don't have anything like that, I don't think, at the city level. I don't think city staff, is necessarily trained in those neutral practices the way that legislative service staff is trained at the state level. So when we talk about turning some of these things over to a city staff entity, I think it's important to realize that doesn't exist now, I don't think, and or an entity capable of acting with that neutrality, and that we need to make sure to get there, to get that training and that level of neutrality available. And if the neutrality, if things don't come across as neutral, as I've experienced, there needs to be, I think, some kind of recourse for challenging the language that's proposed from that entity. Related, I would emphasize the need for transparency about the source of the booklet language. If it is sticking with proponents and citizens contributing to that, I think it's worth considering. I don't think at this point they're identified who is making a comment. And I think, consider the source is a helpful mantra in evaluating, a message in this booklet. I think there were a lot of feelings among the public that I heard on the last round that ballot language, booklet language was intentionally misleading and couldn't be trusted. And, knowing the source of that language helps, whether it's legislative service staff or the proponents and identified or a citizen identified. That helps a lot, I think, in evaluating the language in the booklet. And I think just to reiterate a point that others made about the timeline and what is different at the state level and the city level, it sounds like the state begins their process of creating booklet language well before knowing that a given initiative will actually make the ballot. So, I think some of the ideas that was limited time on the city level, that goes along with the limited resources that we currently have. But if you're able to start that process when an initiative is submitted, as opposed to waiting the 25 days for it to be approved or any longer than that, as the state does, to start as soon as they can, you can lengthen that timeline that we're worried about shortening. I think that's it for me for now.
I appreciate that, Owen. Thank you. Again, folks can write in the chat as well too. And for public comment, Councilman Black, do we have any?
No, I just want to add that the last slide we had was on our future topics. And so we will for sure come back next time, which is March 17th, with some more vetted recommendations on how to improve the ballot booklet based on this conversation. And also with more information about how we might be able to adjust any timelines that we can adjust and how that might be helpful. And then hopefully talk more about the fiscal analysis. And again, as Clerk López mentioned, any other items or subjects you want us to look into, please let us know and we will do that. Ian, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second and say thank you for adding the public comment. And thanks to the clerk's office for working with me to get outreach to petitioners that have gone through this process before. I just really want to encourage everybody to take the opportunity to share this, tell other people that it's happening, especially those that have been connected to ballot initiatives. So far, I think we had 3 written comments and then this one today. So we certainly want to hear from more than 4 people as we make these critical moves forward for democracy.
Thank you, Ian. And know that on that, you know, one of the things, so and I know Katie Blackley had posted a comment too, and I want to address this one, Councilwoman. I think this came under that just popped up, which is a question in looking at some of the timeline changes that are proposed, that they may be incompatible with some of the changes to number of signatures or ballot measures candidates you may be proposing later. How have you weighed the shortened timelines with the additional burden that puts Denverites trying to get on the ballot? And one of the things that we are doing is we're operating with this timeline. So one of the things that, you know, that we cannot change is a lot of the state statute timelines, especially around Tabor, and also in terms of when we ultimately put a ballot in your hands and you getting it to us by 7 p.m. on the last day to vote, right? And so I think it's really, you know, that goes backwards, and there's a lot of different processes. You know, we're printing for over 500,000 people. So I think, you know, for us, we have to make sure that that timeline is solid. Every proposal that we see right here in front of us, our staff has meticulously, and will continue to look on where that goes on the timeline. Again, having that ballot in your hands with ample time to vote, Dropbox, in person, by mail, drive through, helps us, right? And so I think at the end of the day, that's what we really, really, really wanted to focus on. So, and for public comment, you know, for you know, shoring up public comment, we want to make sure, we want to encourage this to have their comments submitted in writing. That's a preferred method. We want to be able to answer those questions, get to those questions, have your input considered, and get back to you. And that's something that I want to take the time, Councilwoman Black, just to let people know, is that that's why we created an outreach and engagement team, a civic participation program through our offices. We want folks to be engaged in the process, in the democratic process, and that's part of what they do. So you'll be seeing that and having that presence around. So Ian, that's something that we definitely appreciate, you know, some of the suggestions there with that. And Audrey, you have your hand up, so I want to make sure that we tap you in. I apologize.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Mr. Clerk. I also wanted to pile on a little bit and thank Katie for that question. If you'll see on this slide here, if we're going to be talking about thresholds, we as an elections division feel strongly that we also need to be looking at the processes used to verify signatures. So there's currently in Denver, you have to verify every single signature. We have some thoughts and some pain points that we want to point out and have these all of these conversations weave together in the end, because we talk frequently about when you make a change, there is a downstream effect. And so we're trying as a staff to paint the picture of the full process. So, you know, strap in, everybody hang on for these next meetings, because they are going to connect the dots for everyone. And we're going to try and come up with solutions that are comprehensive, that might solve sort of multiple problems along the way without creating more. So I just thank you so much for the questions. They're wonderful. Thank you.
All right. Councilwoman, do we want to wrap this one up?
Can I just jump in really quickly? Building up what Audrey said, thanks, I really appreciate it. I think it would be valuable for the public who doesn't live in the space that we live in, and then dates and timelines. As we're talking about these things moving forward, it might be valuable to just have a slide that provides a timeline for, you know, a standard election to be able to like look at it and see. Because I think talking about these things in, you know, like in space versus sort of having that visual for the public to be able to really understand what we're talking about would be really valuable. So if I can just make an ask that we have, even if it's just a general timeline, you know, I think it would be really helpful for people and it would help them move the conversation forward. Thank you. Thanks, guys. And thanks for all your hard work. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I think that's a very, very good suggestion. Literally, the one that we have, I had to capture in a kind of like a landscape mode for me to understand. So doing that with the camera, that's how long it is with all these little notches in there. So yes, we'll do our best to try to synthesize that. And I think it's a great suggestion. We're working that internally. We actually had a huge staff, you know, process, you know, retreat that our director led this past week, where we looked at a lot of different processes, and one of the things that really is, you know, what guides that is state statute, our rules, and then also that timeline. So yes, we'd love for folks to be able to understand that. I think we are baked.
That's it. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the great
that.
discussion.
Remember, additional comments, questions, BAMC@denvergov.org. Okay. Thank you.